sorry about that, everyone. We were cut off for a minute there, but we'll start again with Mark, and hopefully there won't be too much of a gap in what he's saying from what you heard. Please, Mark.
Okay, so we'll just pick up where we sort of lost the Wi-Fi connection. So I've explained why the claim has gone in, what the government have offered us, and the fact that all of our consultation gives us overwhelming support from the members of over 90% of people who replied to submit a claim and move to a ballot. So the NEC's decided now that given the government's intransigent position, the only way for us to play a strong hand and persuade them to engage with us properly is to show them that we can win a ballot for industrial action. So the NEC has agreed that all members in the UK civil service, government departments, and those linked bodies that have a link to the civil service will be balloted starting on the 18th of March and running for 6 weeks up to April the 29th. There will be 2 questions on the ballot paper. One is, will people support a programme of sustained, targeted industrial action and or member action? And a second question, whether people will support action short of a strike. Now, those questions are designed to give us the maximum leverage. As we speak, we are working up targeted action proposals where each of our government departments have submitted places that will have a very clear impact on the government. Many of them will be Brexit focused, and they are designed not to protest, but to have sustained strike action with strike pay of members putting the maximum pressure on the government. In addition to that, we're asking all members to join in with action as the NEC calls it. And the action short of a strike ballot is allowed to give us legal protection to call action such as not volunteering for Brexit duties, not working overtime in a targeted basis, and other forms of action short of a strike causing maximum disruption. And if we get those votes, we believe we're in the strongest place we've ever been with the government because they are utterly dependent on us at this particular time. So the key question I'm going to finish on is that in order to put the maximum pressure on the government, we have to win a ballot and get over 50% turnout. Last year we got 86% voting for a strike and a 42% turnout. Because this ballot is narrower, it is the UK civil service and clearly linked areas, it is a smaller ballot, and it is a ballot of people who in the main last year turned out at 40% or higher. So if you go back 1 year, essentially all we needed to get a legal mandate last year was 12,000 more people voting. Even voting no in the ballot would have given us a legal strike. So our objective here has to be to get every member to vote, to tell them there's 2 questions on the ballot, to ensure that we've got everybody's ballot addresses, personal emails, mobile phone numbers. We're seeking to get 1,000 volunteers to help us do phone banking in the first week of the ballot with new software. That means you can do phone banking from your union room, from your front room, from anywhere. And we're aiming to ring every single member, that's 120,000 members in the first week, by getting 1,000 volunteers to ring people direct, to ask them if they've got their ballot paper and asking them to vote. If that works, the major problem we had last time, where people told us they hadn't received ballot papers, but it was so late in the day we couldn't get them new ones, we believe, get over the 50% turnout. And so I'm going to finish really by just saying our claim is just. We have been treated appallingly. The government needs us more than ever before. If we get people to vote yes, yes, and more than half of them vote, which is entirely doable, we on the 30th of April will be able to go to the Treasury in the strongest position we have ever been in. That's what we're hoping people will now support, do everything they can to get involved and help. And that could mean, if we're successful, that 2019 is the year. We don't get another cut in living standards. We get above the rate of inflation pay rises and a move to start restoring equal pay across the civil service.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mark. Just to say that I apologise we couldn't get someone in to sign for this. We will be trying to get it up online with subtitling within 24 hours, so hopefully we'll be able to arrange that for everybody, but sorry that we couldn't do it live with that. We're now going to be going on to questions. I have some that have already been sent in, some which have come in from the room, and do continue to send them over. And of course, please, online, if you could send your questions in with your name and branch, that would be wonderful. And please also remember to like and share this. and get as many people seeing it and hearing what people have to say, what Mark has to say, and the questions that people have. That would be wonderful. So the first question I'll go on to from Siobhan. Mark reported from the meeting with the Cabinet Office that Manzoni had offered civil servants a derisory 1%. Will the FDA and Prospect also be balloting over pay?
Well, I'd like to think it would be nice if they did. Of course, I can't make commitments for the FDA and Prospect. I can say to people that the FDA and Prospect were as unhappy as we were by Mr. Manzoni's attitude, because I think they also felt it was a real slap in the face. They have gone away to report back to their executives, and we are urging them to be as united with us as possible. My honest expectation is I don't think it's likely at this point the FDA will be balloting. Prospect will talk to their reps in different parts of the civil service, and we will hope to be as united with them as possible. But the NEC strategy is based on, if anyone joins us, that will be a fantastic boost, but that we believe, even if it is just us, because of the work that our members do, that a yes vote in the ballot is still strong enough leverage to get the government to make concessions.
That's good, brilliant. Thank you. The next question I have sent in is, surely 10% is madness. We couldn't get members to vote for 5% last year. What makes you think we can get them to vote for 10%? And that's from Nigel.
Well, I honestly don't believe there will be a single person watching who wouldn't like to have a 10% pay rise. So I don't think it can be madness that our aspiration is based on what independent research tells us still would not take us back to people's pay levels in 2008. And I think that's the thing to remember. What the government's done to us is they've taken the civil service from a certain position in the economy, never at massive heights, but it was in a certain position in the economy, and it has reduced the value of the work we do and has stripped our terms and conditions, mainly pensions and the compensation scheme. So we are historically far worse off than we were. So our claim does not even take us back to where we would be, and it is independently researched. And I think that when members are voting, I believe what they're voting for is whether they are prepared to take action to get the government to make concessions. But if we are going into battle, I think the view that the NEC has is no point having a battle and setting a claim at a level where if we were successful, then as you usually never get 100% of what you ask for, if you ask for 5% and even if you do really well, you're likely to be compromising at 2, 3, 4%. And so if you start with what you can justify, it gives you the room in negotiations to ensure that what you achieve with a successful ballot is nearer where you set out. And I would just repeat that last year we had a lot of complaints from people who told us, why are you telling us we're 14 or 15% worse off than we were, but you're only claiming a third of that as a pay rise? And so all I can say is it's researched, it's justified by all of the facts, it gives us a clear aspiration to aim for, and we say to members, if we vote for action in support of that, it makes it far more likely we get significantly higher than inflation than if we set our sights too low.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's a really good explanation of where that's come from. The next question is one from the room, and it's something dear to my heart. It's a question on pay progression. So pay progression and spinal points are a huge problem for HMRC staff in Bristol. How do they fit into the 2019 pay claim?
So when people see, I'm glad that question's come up because we had a good debate on this at the NEC, and we amended the claim we consulted on to specifically include a bullet point that there must be progression and that people must be able to get to the rate for the job, which is the max. Now, what the NEC understands is in some departments, now we don't have pay scales, we have a spot rate, and so that wasn't valid for everybody, but we know that in the big departments it's a huge issue, and HMRC is one of them, and we know that members write to us all the time and saying there's a max of my rate, but I will never ever get to it. And so the pay claim, when you see the detail, it is a headline of 10%. It is also then for progression, for equal pay and for national pay, and that it must be funded and not giving up terms and conditions. So for anyone who's worried about progression, it will be central to the claim. And what I would say to people is let's imagine we win the ballot and the government say, okay, we won't be quite so arrogant, we'll start talking to you. I think we all know that to get to national pay bargaining, which incidentally Jeremy Corbyn has promised if Labour get to power he will reintroduce in the civil service, you couldn't do it overnight because we have to unpick so much. You'll have to have a process to bring everything together that will take quite a while. So it's quite likely if we have a successful campaign, the first stage of that will be to get the money from the Treasury. We want national negotiations around that, but the plain fact is if any department gets significant more resource, so if HMRC was to suddenly get 5 or 6% for pay, then clearly if we have to have those talks, the HMRC elected reps would use that money to ensure that it met the demands of its members. If you've got more cash, you can sort out your equal pay. And incidentally, HMRC and DWP, some of our lower paying departments, with a huge gender pay gap, where we have women often concentrated in the lower grades, in order to deal with some of these issues, you need money. So I suppose the point I'm making is progression is definitely one of those priorities. Equal pay will be another, but you need money to do that. We would like to sort it all in one national pay system at the beginning, and even to start on that road would be a huge step forward. But if transitionally to get there you have to have a round of further delegated talks with more resource, then clearly if we had 10%, those talks would be an awful lot easier to conduct.
Brilliant, thank you. On to another question that we have here. We've got, are there any plans for further pay talks with the Cabinet Office? And that's from Dave.
Yes, and thanks Dave for that. We have already agreed with the Cabinet Office now a series of meetings because I should say that the NEC has issued an instruction to all our pay negotiators in the departments that we will not engage with any departmental pay talks while we're balloting because it is a diversion, frankly, and it causes confusion. And you can't say to the Treasury you want central talks and central negotiations if it's business as usual in the department. So we have not engaged in departmental talks, and the NEC agreed that should continue for the duration of the ballot. But what we do want is central talks, and I'm pleased to report that they've given us an outline timetable, and there will be meetings now about their pay remit. But the reason that we're balloting while that's taking place is because they've already told us the core part of that remit is 1% funded. And if we waited until April and come to you in April and then tell you it's 1% funded and you can do your own thing if you can magic up money, we've lost the leverage that we have if we have a ballot and a result in April, when whatever happens, the government is likely to be in some turmoil. So we will be meeting regularly, and you hope as we get more active that maybe their stance will start to change. And I always make this point. The first thing we'll do when we get the vote on the 29th of April, if it's a massive vote, will not be to call a strike the next day. It will be to go straight to the Treasury and tell them we've done what you don't think we can do. Now, if they still tell us nothing's changed, then obviously we would move to call the action. So I hope that explains, and we will report back to people anything that happens in those talks in the next few months. But the best way to strengthen our hand is to give us a huge yes vote and over 50% of people voting.
Brilliant, thank you. Next I'll go to a question from Nikki, and they've asked, can't you instruct the membership to drag their heels, delay and frustrate all work in connection with Brexit, and maybe the employer and Treasury ministers will wake up and smell the coffee, just because the latter won't honour our worth with a decent pay settlement. It doesn't diminish our value. What do you have to say to that?
Well, that's, first of all, a great question. Just a great question. That's a great statement. And as we know, that the Cabinet Office and the Treasury usually tune in to these things. So if they are watching, they need to put their hands in their wallet and get the money out, is my message to them. So I'll phrase this to ensure I'm complying with the legal requirements, so they constantly look to trip us up. The Prison Officers Association, our sister union, was taken to court by the Prison Service and defeated in court because they told their members not to volunteer in prisons, and that was construed as industrial action that needed the protection of an industrial action ballot. So we, at the moment, could not even issue an instruction to members saying do not volunteer for anything in Brexit, because that would be in breach of the Trade Union Act. I would say to anybody watching this that you should think long and hard about why anybody would want to volunteer to do anything at the moment when your pensions are being robbed, your redundancy is back under threat, and you're getting a 1% pay offer. If it was me, I wouldn't be volunteering to do a single thing. That's my opinion, of course, not a legal instruction, but I'm sure people are getting the point. But that is why we had the second question on this ballot paper, because if people vote for action short of a strike, it would allow the union to call on people collectively to take all forms of disruptive action short of strike action in terms of volunteering, working to rule, not working overtime. And the NEC's view is that we want to target that, because we know in some departments they really are going to be asking people to do things. And if we've got an action short of a strike mandate, we can ask people not to do that. So at the moment, I think people should use their common sense and ask themselves why they want to help anyone when they're being treated so badly. But in order for the union to collectively organise that, we need you to vote yes to both questions on the ballot.
Lovely, thank you. We are getting questions in from Facebook and from the room, and if you could continue to like and share online, then that would be really great. The next question is from Tim Andrews at the DWP. Is the timing of the ballot right in relation to Brexit, where people may feel voting is not a priority?
Okay, so I mean, the first thing, and I'm glad the questions come up, we hope it is everyone's priority to vote. Look, last time 58% of people didn't vote. Many of them didn't get ballot papers. Many people we know often think they don't like to vote no because they think it's disloyal. And sometimes people think, because I don't want to strike, I just won't vote. I think the thing we want to get across here is abstaining is worse than voting no. Right? Because actually, in the last ballot, it would have been far better had more people voted no. And as I said at the beginning, if 12,000 people had voted no, we would have beaten the legal threshold and still had a 75% vote for strike action. So, you know, it's one of those ironies. It is better to have a 60% turnout and a 65-35 yes-no vote than a 90% yes vote to get you 49% because legally you can't do anything with it. So we hope everyone will prioritise voting. Look, I understand that, you know, every waking minute at the moment, all people eat, sleep and drink seems to be Brexit. Ironically, as that happens, the government's getting away with cutting public services and cutting our terms and conditions, and we're trying to focus people on whether we are in or out of the European Union. If we do not get a decent pay rise, your living standards will fall further behind. And we've timed the vote because actually we do judge that Brexit does give us leverage. You know, we know there are departments at the moment recruiting hand over fist, too little, too late, with untrained staff to try and plug gaps. We know Operation Yellowhammer, they're looking for 5,000 people, and they're going to target the MOD and DWP because they don't think they're affected by Brexit, and ask those departments to give volunteers. It's a bit rich in DWP. They don't want you to... It's not a Brexit department, so come and do Brexit when universal credit is in utter chaos and the DWP is understaffed. You know, so this is sort of panic measures, really. And all I can say is I know that people will have other things on their mind, but for us, I think it's a pretty clear equation. The government needs us. They're treating us badly. If we can tell them if they need us, they need to pay for that, then actually it puts us in a strong hand. And that's what I hope everybody will realise. It's just an X in the ballot box. And if you do that, the union's position is immeasurably stronger. And in fact, John Manzoni has told us what will happen if we don't, hasn't he? He's told us wherever you work, you've got 1% funded. And anything more than 1%, which is less than the rate of inflation, you have to self-finance either through cuts, through closures, or trading in terms and conditions, none of which we believe are acceptable because we deserve a pay rise without any strings attached.
Thank you. And there have been a few questions about turnout and people voting numbers. There's one here which is slightly different. It's, are you worried by the 7% turnout for the NEC elections and the generally low levels of engagement in the union's internal democracy? Why do you think this is, and what can be done about it?
So I'm worried in any ballot we have where the turnout is low, whether it's an election or whether it's a referendum or whether it is a ballot on a pay offer or an industrial action ballot. The union is its members. When our majority of our members don't participate, then actually that is never something we should rest on our laurels. Now, our NEC elections have a turnout last year was 8%, and I know that for many members, when they get a ballot paper with a booklet with 80 candidates in, people think it takes actually some doing to raid through it. The only point I would make is that those elections decide who runs the union, and who runs the union makes the decisions that come your way. So it is in everybody's interest to have confidence and vote for the people in the union, whatever the contested post is. But in this ballot, you're not faced with a ballot with 80 names. You're faced with a ballot paper that will have 4 boxes 2 questions, yes or no. And I think for this we have to really focus people's minds. It is easy to vote. It is a free post envelope coming back. You get the envelope you need to post, and they are dependent on apathy that people will not bother. And that's why we are going to put so much effort in that first week to get 1,000 volunteers to ring everyone. And that's why I'd say to anyone watching, we would like people's mobile phone numbers, we would like your personal email address, not to pester you, not to drag people away for the sing off in the voice or whatever that people be doing on a Saturday night. It is because we don't want to engage people in long conversations. We want to ask you a simple question. Have you had your ballot paper? And if you haven't, shall we send you a replacement? And if you have, will you please vote? And so that engagement is so, I think, so critical. And that's why we've also given ourselves a 6-week ballot paper this time round. And so we will issue the ballot papers. We are asking people to vote. And in that 6 weeks, we will have the time to hopefully chase up anyone who hasn't voted. And I just want to really make this point. I'm hoping everybody votes yes, yes. But what I hope more than anything is that people tell us what they think and they participate in the ballot. Because every time we win, but we fail to beat the legal threshold, it's really demoralising for the people who vote. I can tell you last time there was a lot of anger in the union when people said, well, why haven't 50% of people voted? So it's a simple ask, and we want people to participate in that. And we're asking everybody watching, if you know anyone in your office or your workplace, they haven't joined the union, ask them to join. Check we've got their ballot details. And there's nothing wrong with asking, have you had your ballot paper, have you voted? You don't have to ask people how they voted, but certainly asking them have they and encouraging them would be a really good thing.
Yeah, thank you. Doing the phone banking last time round, I can definitely see that just having the correct details for members is a really important thing. So if everyone can do their bit to make sure they and their colleagues have updated that, I think that would be a good way to go. A question from Angela on Facebook. In light of successful appeals in respect of the judges and fire brigades pensions and the pending police appeal on the same basis, what are PCS's plans for the civil service pensions?
Well, I'm glad pensions has come up because let me say that one of the things that members often say to us is they want more pay, but they're more worried about their office closing, what's happening with their pension, what is happening about the redundancy scheme. One of the points that we want to make is that pay is the one thing at the beginning of the year that unites us all. But it isn't rocket science to work out if we win a ballot on pay and we get anything more out of them, in other words, we move forward, the union is stronger. If, on the other hand, we do not make progress on pay, then it means that whether it is your office closing or anything else, the employer just generally feels more confident. So the outcome of this ballot affects everything else. On pensions, we are issuing a detailed briefing note to representatives within the next few days, because people do need to know that the government sneaked through in Parliament an announcement that was de facto a further raid on public sector pensions that actually is quite breathtaking. When the pensions robbery took place in 2010-11, the government introduced new cost capping measures that were introduced to say if pensions cost more than we anticipate, they were going to ask us to pay more. They've just had their first valuation, and the civil service pension scheme, more than any other pension scheme in Britain, we have effectively overpaid and they have underpaid by £5.4 billion. The law requires them to put that back into the pension scheme, and we were in talks with them, and that was going to result in everybody having a 2% reduction in pension contributions, which would have been effectively a 2% pay rise, and improved accrual rates, and we were able to put right some of those equality issues on pensions about non-married couples that we have long wanted to do. And that was at an advanced stage. The FBU won a legal challenge based on age discrimination, which was a very good legal challenge, and we were talking to them about how we could then ensure we benefited on the same judgment on our pension scheme. The government announced in Parliament a manoeuvre that said because we've lost, so we've been found to have acted unlawfully, we're now suspending all pensions valuations in case we now have to put more money in to fix our illegal act. And they will now delay for a year any further move on public sector pensions. In other words, you will all be robbed of a 2% increase in your pay packet this summer that you would do. And bear in mind, you only do it not because the government were ever generous, because austerity over the last 5 years has meant pay has been so low that pensions have actually cost a lot less. So they're taking it off us in every way. And so we are writing to the TUC to try and get public sector-wide cooperation around this public sector pensions robbery, and that's something we think will feature during the year. So I hope that answers the question. We are very much engaged with the unions, and we will be looking at any legal options that we have. And I can also say to people that next week I will be issuing a report from a meeting I had yesterday with the government minister on our redundancy terms, which is also now coming back, where the government want to now also reinstate cuts in the redundancy scheme. So what all these things tell us is our pay vote really is the marker for the year. We do well on this, we're in a stronger position on pensions and the redundancy scheme later on. If we don't do well on this, it's obvious, isn't it, that the government's going to sit there and think, well, they didn't do it on pay 2 years running, we think we can get away with doing other stuff. So I hope that the person asking the question there can see we understand the connection. But there's two things. One is the strength of the union is what will determine the outcome, and the second thing is the government continue to rob you in every conceivable way, whether it's your wages, your pensions, or your redundancy rights. All of them, they want to go backwards, and that is something we have to stop, hence the importance of this ballot.
Definitely, thank you. Question from Kenny. The Scottish Government have reneged on restoration of members' pay in the devolved areas. Will there be a ballot of Scottish devolved branches on this issue?
So the ballot that we've had, I said at the beginning, this is a UK civil service-wide ballot, and anyone who is connected to the civil service, 17 areas have asked to be included in the ballot, and we've included them all. The devolved Scottish and Welsh areas are not included in the ballot, but what the NEC is saying to anyone else is if you want to at the same time have pay disputes, we will support you. So if members in Scotland say that they wish to have action against what the Scottish Government is doing, we will support that, but that needs to come from the areas affected. It won't be covered by the ballot that we're having here.
Thank you. So a question that we had from Jenny, which is very relevant to get answered now, is that are branches going to get sufficient materials in a timely manner in the build-up and during the ballot? Will we receive a programme of literature?
So I'm glad to say yes, and one of the things when we reviewed last year was we had lots and lots of brilliant suggestions from people who told us what could have been done better. So we won't be having the red button on the computer for you to say you voted, because lots of people seem to think they thought they'd voted last time, so that's not happening. And we will have a different method of people telling us that they have voted, so that's one adjustment. On the literature, what I can say is going to happen is broadly this. Every member will now get an email every week. We've got 76% of members' personal email addresses. The last one we sent out, 60% opened. So we've got a much better open rate, and we'll communicate direct to members. If we haven't got your personal email, because we don't want to send this stuff to work, please give us a personal email address. On top of that, we're going to issue regular activists bulletins, printed and digitally, that will give people in the offices much more detail about all of these relevant things. So there's going to be a bulletin on the claim, how to justify the claim, to know all the ins and outs of it. There'll be a bulletin on our industrial action strategy, what targeted action that we're looking to take. We're going to have various other detailed briefings, and also there'll be a series of leaflets during the campaign for people to give out in workplaces or outside where the employer is hostile. So there will be a very detailed communications plan based on weekly emails to members, activist briefing bulletins, and leaflets to put out in the workplace. We'll also continue to use social media and do other Facebook Live events as well.
Perfect, that's great. Thank you so much. And a question from Chris. How do you think we can better involve our union's equality structures to look to increase members' engagement in the ballot?
Well, again, I'm glad that question's come out, because we are asking our equality forums to look at whether or not some of the messaging that we have is always hitting home with the different demographics that we cover in the union. People will notice that one of the things I've done with the claim is highlighted much more this time than last about the equal pay element of the claim and how we want to ensure that we don't just have equal pay within the department, but we have it right across the way to rise pay up. So I've just done a lot of meetings last week in workplaces, in areas where we had very diverse workforces to try and engage with them directly. But essentially we're going to ask our equality forums and our branches to ensure the messaging that we give out is seen to be hitting the members and the concerns that members actually have with us. So that's our first port of call, and certainly all our equality forums were consulted about this pay claim. And in fact, I think that's one of the reasons why the pay claim is, I think, a bit more detailed than a sort of simple 5%. It is much more focusing on the other elements as well as the lead figure.
Thank you very much. And there's going to be some members who aren't balloted again. And we've got a question from Lisa from the Birmingham South branch, and she's asked, hoping we'll win the ballot, how do the NEC decide which departments have most impact in going out on strike?
Okay, so I think on the ballot, the thing to say is that what we did do differently is last year we balloted everyone in the public sector. And what we found with that was that the areas that were not core civil service or linked, some did well, but some had considerably lower turnouts than the average. Some of them were quite large areas. We had one area with 5,000 members where less than 20% voted. And the reason they didn't vote is because their employer actually persuaded them they weren't civil servants and it was nothing to do with them. And therefore what this ballot is meant to do is to highlight we have a very clear UK civil service government departments and linked bodies that are very much linked. That is a very discrete area. Turnout was better there than most last year, and it gives us still a very powerful and sizable sort of area to go and engage with. But what we're saying to everybody else is that if people feel, well, in the first instance they should be included, they can still ask to be included. I've mentioned that we've already added 17 areas in because reps have said to us, can we be in? And anyone who doesn't want to be in the aggregate ballot, we are encouraging people, if where you work, you would benefit from running a simultaneous pay campaign, the NEC will support that and put some resources in. The final obvious point I'd make is this is Britain's second biggest ballot under the new laws, and the biggest was the one we had last year. And so if we win this ballot, I have no doubt that all parts of the union will benefit by seeing such a concentrated effort that would have a spin-off. If government were forced to put more money into core civil service departments, it is not then such a big leap to put the pressure on for that to also happen elsewhere where members are prepared to support it. So that's the thinking.
Great. Thank you very much. A question here from Anik. What are our MPs doing regarding supporting our campaign in 2019, and can we influence change?
Yes, so I can tell you that we've already had a meeting with the Labour Shadow Front Bench, and we will be meeting them and are expecting parliamentary support for our pay campaign. People should know we've got 3 strikes on at the moment. We've got private security, catering, portering staff in Bay's headquarters on strike for the London living wage. 4 shadow cabinet members were on their picket line. We've got a ballot going on at the moment of security guards in Parliament. Jeremy Corbyn himself came out yesterday and supported that. And we've got strikes in the royal palaces, which has also been supported by politicians, including Chris Stevens from the Scottish National Party, who's our parliamentary chair. So when this ballot starts, we will be having a parliamentary event, and we will be asking all the members to email their MP in order to try and get political support. And the one thing I think we can guarantee is that if we have a ballot for action, for one of the first times, shamefully, but for one of the first times in my lifetime, we would be expecting in Parliament the opposition, not just the official opposition, but others will be supporting us in Parliament itself, which I think will be a huge lift, because we can all remember the pension strike, people shuffling around looking embarrassed and not thinking there should be strikes. Well, now we know we will get support, and I think that's important. And where we have MPs who are in, we should be putting pressure on them. You know, people will know. I did question time recently with a certain Tory MP from these parts, Devizes, I think, Claire Perry's from, isn't it? And she was very, very vociferous. And so we've got to make sure that even if they're government MPs in these areas, that we are still putting pressure on them, because as constituents, They cannot get away with voting for you to have cuts in your living standards all the time. And so we will be using the parliamentary and political processes to get as much support as we can.
Great, thank you. Probably the last question now, because we're running out of time. So last question,
Okay.
and anything else you'd like to say. It's from Mark. And when will the union be publishing the civil service's response to its claims of being misled during negotiations? There are potential breaches of the Civil Service Code, but the union has failed to update members on any disciplinary action being sought against the civil service or senior civil service leaders.
Okay, so I would not imagine there'll be any disciplinary action against any senior civil service leaders. And actually, what we base our claim on is the court papers that show there was a meeting in February of the permanent secretaries, where the permanent secretaries decided collectively, as the evidence shows, to use the civil service as an example to everybody else to keep pay rates down, and where it was clear they collectively decided to take less than they could have done. And we will continue to make that claim. When I met John Manzoni last week, two of the officials in the court case claimed that is not what they did, and the papers speak for themselves in our view. And I think the key thing that we have to remember is this, and this is a truism, and I think people should write to their chief executives and permanent secretaries to make this point. When managers in the health service, people in local government and people in education at senior levels, the role they played, to varying degrees, was that they went to politicians in the Treasury and said, we are desperate for resource because of the cuts in pay and terms and conditions after austerity. Now, most notably, we know in the health service unions and the employers met for 6 months to put pressure on the government to put funding in. Now, while other people were arguing for their staff to one degree or another, ours uniquely did the opposite. They not only failed to do that, they didn't even take what they could have done. I think that is a unique betrayal. No one's going to get disciplined, because actually you could argue they're doing their master's work in many ways, aren't they? Yeah? But that is what you need to know. So whoever it is, whether it's in HMRC, DWP, DEFRA, when they're now telling you how wonderful you are, and if we all pitch in the spirit of Blighty, we'll get through Brexit, and the good old civil service is going to get them through, I think what you should remember is, what have you done to my pension? What have you done to my redundancy rights? Have you closed my office? Are you laying people off? And have you cut my pay for 10 consecutive years? I think if the answer to those questions is yes, my view is, never mind the spirit of Blighty, what we want is the spirit of trade unionism, standing together to say enough's enough, and a vote in the ballot will give us the strongest possible cost. And far better than asking for a senior manager to be disciplined would be, I think, getting them to give us the money that we need. And I think that will be our focus. But their betrayal is without doubt. And I think you should remember that and tell your colleagues about it, because frankly, when I think people know, it may only have been 0.5%. The 0.5% in your pocket that you could have had is a lot better than sending it back to the Treasury for someone else. And that is the effect of what they did. So I hope people remember that. And my final message is, we know it's not easy for anyone, but the only way to turn this tide is to complete your ballot paper and vote yes, yes, and post it. And if you think of the balance at the moment, and you may feel the employers are up here and we're always here, an above 50% turnout with huge yes votes begins to do this. And then when we start taking action that really hurts them, it begins to look more like that. And that's what we want, isn't it? We want to turn the balance in our favour. We don't want to strike. We want them to pay you what they do. If it takes to strike, we should do that. But the key to this is members voting, and if members vote, we're in a strong position. And I want to thank everybody for watching, for coming tonight, and say if we do everything we can to get more people involved, we've got a real chance. They're depending on the same outcome as last year. Let's kick them from that arrogant assumption and actually show them that we're going to do it.
Lovely. Thank you so much.